Well, so I want to talk about what I would consider, at least over the last 20 years, some of the downside of the internet and being online is that the world, for many people, has become a lonelier place for a number of reasons. It's also been perhaps a little bit darker for folks as well. And I want to talk about, the implications with regard to mental health as we currently are seeing it, because I would argue that, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that there are a lot of people who are far worse off now mentally than they were 25 years ago, before the internet and social media in particular was as ubiquitous. And I don't think we truly understood, because again, the market decides in the end what we will all consume. What we will all be forced to consume. And a lot of the innovations around social media and the dopamine shots that it is enabling has created a lot of downside for people, I would argue. And I'm curious what you think about that in particular, but what you think the ramifications are with regard to the AI revolution coming along with that in place.
I'm definitely not like a Pollyanna kind of like, all positive on AI or anything. No one can be, I think, on any technology. I think technology by itself is inert, right? I mean, like whether even with fire, right? I mean, you could use fire to, warm yourself up or to provide light in the caves, back to our ancestral days. But you could also, make a torch and go burn someone's house down. So, it's not by itself a positive or a negative. It's how you use it. And, generally speaking, like social media over the last 15, 20 years has had no guardrails. And it's been really controlled by corporate interests and, by bad actors using it for their own purposes. And it is extremely effective for those means. It actually is pretty interesting kind of how it's been used without any guardrails. That it isn't even worse than it is today, considering the fact that there wasn't any real regulation for a long time. That things that they're not even worse than they are, but it's amazing kind of that we aren't further down the path and that we've gotten. I think part of what is likely to happen, I think, with generative artificial intelligence is that as people kind of find ways to democratize content and get better content faster, which is what's going to happen. Situations like this, where we're talking, through electronic means and the rest, will become more frequent for people, but they'll also potentially have a lower value. So, the people will spend more of their time online in digital ways. But I think as a result, in-person settings and in-person experiences will elevate their importance for a lot of people. And I think as we think about what that means, we have to really be thoughtful about how to encourage people to spend time with those that they care about and that care for them, and really encourage social connection as a primary means of mental health for many people, not just in this country where there is a loneliness epidemic, but across the world. And I think people kind of feel like, oh, I just talked to someone on LinkedIn or on Instagram, so I've connected with them. But it doesn't really work that way. It's not a stand-in for social connection. You really need to see someone in person, preferably like on a hike or at a park, or at a third place, like a coffee shop or the gym or something like that, to really count as connection. And we haven't spent enough time really thinking about social connection in person, in public, in ways that are supported as a kind of antidote to what happens online. And it's going to get worse as the digital kind of connection kind of explodes over the next couple of years. Protecting our mental health through social connection is going to become even more important. And again, I think it requires someone to really take responsibility for that. It's not going to happen on its own. It requires some leadership.
Yeah, I have this belief that our primitive, I don't know if it's the limbic system, whatever our primitive brain that has developed over years and hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, in being able to recognize that this is a human conversation, even though we are not face-to-face and in person. But we recognize, because we understand each other to be human, that this is a human conversation and a human interaction. But with the advent of artificial intelligence created avatars that are going to be imperceptible to this conversation and will have the generative AI capacity to engage in an adequately meaningful conversation that our primitive, we will not be able to tell the difference, or at least our internal whatever limbic system won't be able to tell the difference between me being an avatar and you being a human, to the point actually where I think we'll be able to get meaningful, and I think there was a movie about this, meaningful and beneficial interactions from completely artificial substitutes.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really fascinating area of both research and technology at present. It's one of the areas that I'm really quite interested in, actually. The furthest along, I would say, in this vein is in the area of what might be called death tech. And it exists primarily, not so much in this country, but primarily in the Far East, where a number of the firms, mostly using Baidu's model and Alibaba's model, the rest are building a number of generative AI kind of companions for people that have recently deceased relatives. And, so you're thinking of people that they're grieving over the loss of their mother, for example, or something similar. They've stood up an avatar of this recently deceased relative, and they continue to commune with this person who is not alive any longer in perpetuity past that person's departure. And they have a meaningful relationship with this person as if they're still there. I read an article recently with one of these people. They talked to their mother, and the person that's standing in for their mother, the avatar, does the same like nagging things that the mother actually did when the mother was around. And it gives this person, that is like a young executive at a Chinese firm, like a degree of comfort that his mother is still there, kind of helping him along. And it's a bit surreal, but I can totally understand and get it. And I imagine there's going to come a time when the kind of weirdness, like it factor, goes away, and people just accept that as like a normal part of life. And if that becomes normal, then a lot of other things that right now are anomalous stop being so, and we start kind of embracing AI as colleague, AI as companion, AI as thought partner into our actual life. But we're not there yet, but I can see it on the horizon.
I don't think there's any question that will become a part of your aging process as a human, is that you will go out of your way to subscribe to some service that captures you so completely in a digital avatar that you can live into perpetuity, and you'll be able to tune it, or it will ask you enough questions to tune itself to present you going forward. I don't think there's any question, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think it's going to get confusing.
I mean, I like a lot of people that are in this field. Like, I grew up reading science fiction and fantasy when I was a child, and I still read a bit today. I read this book like at the beginning of our pandemic that I couldn't read in full because I started reading it before our pandemic, and then when the pandemic happened, I couldn't read it because it was about a pandemic, and I couldn't read about a pandemic in fiction while our pandemic was happening. There's a great book. It's called How High We Go in the Dark, and it takes place like maybe 60 years from now. And in this book, they envisage a world where people have essentially like built their AI models into robot animals, like robot companion pets, essentially. And so in this one country, they have like the voice of deceased relatives in these like robot pets. And because of the pandemic, like the robot pet repair people are all out of work. They can't fix the pets anymore. So people have these like pets that are not fixable. And but it's so important that this is like the only way they can connect with their deceased relatives. And the people that are fixing the pets are like so in high demand because everyone wants to be able to still connect with their deceased relatives. It's very interesting, like, consideration of what the future world might be like, in terms of emotional connection and all the rest.
Well, so there are so many implications, and having a very elderly father who my mother passed a decade prior, and he lived effectively alone for many years. There is something to be said for solutions like that to help people who, for any number of life reasons, are alone and would just welcome a spontaneous interaction of any type, rather than just watching television or surfing the internet or whatever it is.
Sure.
So I'm fascinated by that. I'm also fascinated, however, there's just so many implications here, but I think there's going to be some significant, speaking of mental health ramifications, some significant impact on, as AI begins to be implemented by large organizations, and capitalism is undefeated, it will inevitably result in cost savings, because that's what corporations do in the capitalist society. And so it will impact information workers first and foremost, rather than, I would argue, blue collar workers. And when those information workers begin to realize, as they're in the middle of their career, that they are just not competitive with what artificial intelligence can do, and when the C-suite recognizes, which they probably already do, that artificial intelligence agents never need benefits, never call in sick, never look for another job, never leave, work weekends 24 hours a day, it will be mentally devastating for a very intelligent information worker to realize that, regardless of all their years of training and all their expertise and all their human capacity, they aren't competitive with agents, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Again, I think that is like kind of a natural process that people have to go through. Like that's like almost like the the Kubler like stages of grief thing. Like people start in that place where like, oh shit, like I'm out of a job. Like the robots are going to take my job. That's like the first stage. But you have to get past that to like, like this is like not what I thought I was going to be doing with my time, my life. But how do I make this work for me? And then you have to get into that point of like, okay, well, if I'm still here and I have 10, 15 years of work left ahead of me, how can I like use this that actually helps me as opposed to be like a threat? And then after that, some people are like, okay, well, I want to make this my whole life is doing AI. I know a lot of people like that have become experts in like a very short amount of time. And other people are like, oh, this isn't going to be my thing, but I need to like live with it. I don't know many people that are still like scared of it. Like most people are like, I thought this is going to take my job, but now that I've done it for 3-6 months, I realize that's not really the case. It's more like it's going to take like this 10% of my job that I hated anyway. And now the other 90% I can do most of the time. And but the thing is, the really funny thing is that like sometimes like it really actually does do a lot of great things. And like the organization can't like accommodate that much change, right? You like Copilot is a great example of this, like Microsoft Copilot. There are certain things within Copilot that are remarkable. Like what it can do for, say, PowerPoint or for Outlook is like the same amount of work in 1/100th amount of time. But when you show that to certain people that have done this their whole life, you're like, wait a second, like this used to take me 20 hours. Now I can do it in 41 minutes. What am I going to do with the other 19 hours and 19 minutes? Like, I don't know what to do with this. And they just like resist it tremendously. Like, even though it should actually help them a lot, they don't accept it at all. So it just goes back to that earlier discussion, which is even if it does work on paper, if the people in the business don't accept it, it doesn't have any effect at all because it's not autonomous. AI isn't like an actual, kind of entity, like a robot walking along saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's not, it doesn't have any agency. It's just, a software program. So the people say, I don't really think we're going to use it now, or we should prioritize something else, or they just don't actually support its adoption. It doesn't get used, even if it is remarkable. So you really have to bring the people along for the ride. Otherwise, nothing really gets done.